In America, we make a big noise about the American dream. We are taught that it's there for the taking, but you have to want it. You have to be willing to work for it. So, we go to work, and that becomes who we are. A nation of dreamers, chasing a shared vision of success, generation after generation after generation. Realizing our dreams the only way that we know how, through hard work, perseverance, and earning respect. D.G. Yuengling & Son was founded in 1829 by German immigrant David Gottlieb Yuengling. In the near 2 centuries that followed, the reins of the old brewery on Mahontongo Street have passed down through 5 generations, each owner leaving their mark on the family business, guiding it through the triumphs and trials of their times to become America's oldest brewery.
I went over to Germany a couple years ago, and we found out that the founder, David G. Yuengling, his father started brewing beer in 1816, and I think that DG was the youngest of the children and had no chance of ever taking over the brewery. So I guess in 1828, he set sail over the United States, landed in Philadelphia, and coal had been discovered about 25 years earlier up in this area. So these little towns were growing and growing. I mean, Pottsville went from like 250 people to 500 to 1,000, and was getting bigger and bigger, and it was a good place for a brewery to begin with.
But he specifically chose Pottsville as well because of the natural spring water. Very soft water, which was very good for brewing German-style beers, and also because there were hills.
There was no refrigeration in those days. There was no electricity. So you had to keep your beer cold underground in caves.
We're now coming into the famous Yuengling Caves. They were dug in the mid-1800s, all by local coal miners. And the purpose was to age the beer, lager the beer at a long, slow process.
You don't have a full appreciation for the tunnels that were dug underneath this brewery until you actually go down and experience it.
I love the caves. I think they're unique. I think there's so much history. You know, DG was down there, and Frederick and Frank. I mean, there's the history here.
DG had 3 sons, David Jr., Frederick, and William. David Jr. opened his own brewery in Richmond, Virginia, and William passed away at the age of 36. Frederick joined his father's business in 1873, changing the name to D.G. Yuengling & Son. Frederick passed in 1899, leaving control of the family business to his only son, Frank.
My grandfather was 21 years old in 1899. He got a message that his father died, and he had to come home and run the brewery, which was deeply in debt because they had just built all these buildings and borrowed money to do it.
As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the looming specter of the prohibition of the sale of alcohol was very real to Americans and American breweries.
At that point, we were almost 100 years old. So for a company to make it that long is monumental. And to know that your business is about to change dramatically because the product you make is no longer allowed, I think it had to be terrifying.
It's very difficult to imagine what that time period was like when Prohibition began. What do? You employ people, and you know, what do you do with your business when the government suddenly comes in and says you can't make this product anymore? One of the ways we are still here today is the creativity that Frank Yuengling had back in the 1930s. Not only did he start the ice cream business, but he made near beer as well. Near beer is 0.5% alcohol, which was legal in those days.
Frank Yuengling had steered the brewery through some of the darkest times in its history. And upon his death in 1963, the 4th generation of Yuengling ownership, that of Dorman and Richard L. Yuengling, began. 8 years later, Dorman would pass away, leaving Richard the sole proprietor of his family's business.
Looking back to the generation when my grandfather and his brother controlled the brewery, probably around the 1950s, 1960s, so many small local town breweries were either bought up by the mega breweries, they went out of business, the families didn't have any interest in them anymore.
Without the capital to invest in modernizing the brewery, production had fallen off. Just barely surviving, D.G. Yuengling and Son was at a crossroads. Dick Yuengling took the reins of America's oldest brewery, knowing he had two choices: grow or fold.
When the time came in 1985 where my dad was able to come back and implement some of his ideas, we were at a low point. We were only producing 137,000 barrels of beer, and this place was barely running 5 days a week. But he had the insight and just had a feeling and an instinct of the things that he wanted to do to increase that capacity.
I just made up my mind. I wasn't put on this earth to struggle just to sell a case of beer. I wasn't going to do that. And that's when we developed the lager brand.
We had an incredibly good brewmaster for a long time, Ray Norbert, that my dad had the utmost confidence in.
He was employed here for probably 57 or 59 years, and he was a brewmaster for 37 out of those years.
I got a call, I came up to the brewery, and Ray and Norbert were back in his office. In the meantime, what they did, they were experimenting, and when they came up with a lager brand. As soon as I tasted it, I knew it was a home run.
But it wasn't just the lager, it was setting itself apart, maybe a little bit of a higher standard.
And then as time went on, I get the phone call from Dick. Dick being Dick. He said, I was thinking, I said, what are you thinking? He said, about bottles.
Everybody's got a brown bottle. Let's use a green bottle.
I wanted a green bottle because it projected an imported image.
And he came up with a Cadillac of a package. It was unbelievable. And that struck a fire.
We were selling way more than the brewery could sustain capacity-wise.
So my dad was at a point where he didn't know what to do. Should he build a brewery? Should he buy a brewery?
Let's build a brewery. And we started building it probably in September of that same year.
And for Christmas that year, my sisters and I, we got him a gift to the Phillies fantasy camp. And it just so happens that a Stroh plant that was built in the 1950s in Tampa, Florida, was, lo and behold, for sale.
So I called Bill Henry, who was then the president, and I said, I'll buy it. That's how the whole thing came about. And I came back, I told David, I said, we're going to buy a plant in Tampa, Florida. And I could see his eyes rolling around in his head because I never told anybody I was going to do this.
That sort of defines who Dick is. His mind was already made up, and nobody was going to tell him otherwise.
We sent him to baseball camp, and he came back with a brewery.
I don't think the older generations ever thought it would be where it is today. I'm proud to be a part of it and to know that those were my family members that grew it to where it needs to be, particularly my dad. He worked hard.
He took it over when it was on the verge of closing. He grew it from nothing to what it is today.
Having a family-owned business is just so important to me because there's not very many of them left, whether it's in the beer business or any other business. You know, to think, I get like a little emotional that 4 other generations put their time in here, and this goes back 155 years ago. Somebody kept this thing going, even through Prohibition. That's pretty rewarding, you know? I got 4 healthy daughters. As long as they work hard and carry on the tradition of this company, these kids will be fine. You don't have to be the biggest. You don't have to be the most successful in anything you do. Just do it well. And that, to me, is great.